All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Stud Stories. We've got the stud. All we need is the story. And now, the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, stud, what is the story?
Well, Dave, it's going to be a good one, my man. This stud story is going to be a continuation of that series that we've been working on called the NWA World Champions. And it features the entire series, going to feature 11 wrestlers that I wrestled against in my 18-year career. And we've already discussed in number one, Luthez, and then number two, from New Zealand, Pat O'Connor. And I just recently released stud story number three, which this one is not about the NWA champions, but this one, the number three, is about Vince McMahon Jr.'s wrestling company. His first trip to Birmingham in 1985. And for listeners that haven't heard that stud story, I highly recommend you listen to that one. You may find it very interesting. It's a lot different. His results in Birmingham is a lot different than it was in most of the cities he was going into.
Indeed.
So today we're going to take a look back, man, at the only Canadian wrestler to ever hold the NWA World title, Gene Kiniski. And he was the third former NWA World Champion that I wrestled in my career. And like the other two, he was older in age, and he was not the champion when I wrestled him, but he had been the champion actually for about 3 years. So just a little bit of history here to get this thing started, Dave. Gene Kiniski was born in Edmonton, Canada on November 23rd, 1928. He grew to be a pretty huge man, I'll tell you that, having wrestled him. He's about 6'4" and 300 pounds when I wrestled him. He began his professional athletic career, not in wrestling, but as a professional football player for the Edmonton Eskimos of the Canadian Football League. So in true heel fashion, he automatically, after he got out of football, he started to refer to himself as a wrestler as Canada's greatest athlete.
Okay.
He knew how to be a heel, and he was a darn good one, as a matter of fact. So he won the NWA World Championship from Luthez in St. Louis, Missouri on January 7th, 1966. It was the last time that Lou would ever be the NWA World Champion. And he was the world champion several different times over different time periods. But this was the last time that he lost the world championship, and he lost this to Gene Kiniski. Kiniski's going to hold that belt for about 3 years, as I said just a minute ago. And we're back again, Dave, in St. Louis, the home of Sam Muchnick, the president of the National Wrestling Alliance. And it's going to become obvious how certain individuals become powerful at different times, and with that power have an effect on calling the shots as to who's going to be the next champion. So Sam, probably more than any other figure in the history of the National Wrestling Alliance, had the power more often than anybody else when it came to making that decision, who's going to be the champion in the NWA. So before we talk about my match with Gene Kiniski, let's talk about the NWA World Title match in Atlanta, Georgia, that I witnessed standing on the stage of the Atlanta Auditorium in 1966 as a senior in high school. And I was going to be watching a match between my father, Buddy Fuller, and Gene Kiniski for the World Heavyweight Championship in Atlanta, Georgia. Sold out Atlanta Auditorium, packed as usual. And I was really shocked the first time I saw him. I had never seen him before. When he came out of the dressing room, at how big he was, man. And obviously he was strong. My father was about 6'2". He weighed about 230 pounds. Kiniski gave my dad bumps during this match that I'd never seen my father take before. And I don't think he had a choice in taking them or not. Gene just gave them to him, you know, and I had no idea that night. I'm standing there as a senior in high school, about 6'8" and 200 pounds, that I'm going to be wrestling this guy 7 years later for the Missouri Heavyweight Championship.
Well, how does this happen so soon? I mean, you've probably only been wrestling professionally for, what, 3 years after finishing a basketball career at the University of Miami. I mean, that had to be one of your first big matches.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of was one of my first big matches, and yeah, I'm a senior in high school. I got 4 years of college at Miami, and then I'm going to start wrestling. And within 3 years after the start of my wrestling career, I'm going to be wrestling Gene Kiniski. This is just another one of those world champions that I really had the opportunity, and I'm going to call it that because it was just that, to wrestle so many great wrestlers that held that title. So, for me, it was, like you said, one of the first big matches I ever had. And then I'd won the Southern Heavyweight Championship in Florida from Paul Jones in the early part of 1973. And it was really unusual for any wrestler to win any type of championship in their first 3 years in the sport. So I was doing pretty darn good for myself. I was off to a good start. I was a Southern Heavyweight Champion after only 3 years. So Sam Muchnick had heard about me because he was pushing Jack Briscoe, who was big man in the Florida territory back in that time frame. And Sam had Jack Briscoe on top in St. Louis, and nobody knew it, but they were grooming Jack Briscoe for the NWA title in the future. So when you regularly got booked on top in St. Louis, something good was going to happen. You could just be guaranteed that if they brought you in there, I'd seen it happen with Jack because I'd been in Florida for 3 years at that point, and then So in early 1973, I've just won this championship, and I get the call from Sam Muchnick that he had already cleared it with Eddie Graham, that he wanted to start booking me in St. Louis. Eddie said it would be okay if he booked me every other Friday night. He didn't say, I want to book you for a show. He says, I want to book you every other Friday night. They only ran that town every other Friday night. So, it said to me that they're looking to do something with me, obviously. So when you regularly, it was the same thing that had happened to Jack Briscoe 2 years earlier, and it kind of painted a picture for me. I was like, wow, I'm wondering right away what they got in store for me. So I'd been going with my father and Eddie Graham to the National Wrestling Alliance summer meetings every year, once a year in Las Vegas. I'd been going for 3 years at this point. And even though I wasn't a member starting in 1971, because of that relationship with Eddie and who he was, and my dad and his relationship, and his having been in the NWA as a promoter before, I was allowed to go into the meetings with all the promoters from all around the world, starting in 1971. So at the summer 1973 NWA meeting, I was very surprised to find out what was coming for me in the near future as regards to St. Louis. So Sam Muchnick, he was still president of the NWA at this point. He asked me to stand up in one of the meetings. He didn't tell me anything about what he was going to do. This is just out of the clear blue. He says, hey, I got a guy back there. I want you to stand up, Ron Fuller. He told everybody, that I was going to be on his main event and his opening up his next run in St. Louis, because he didn't run St. Louis in the summertime at all because he was a St. Louis Cardinal baseball fan. And he didn't want to have his wrestling company compete with this baseball team.
Wow. That's a big fan. Wow.
That's a huge fan. And in fact, he got his start as a sports writer long before he got into wrestling and became a promoter. He was a sports writer for the St. Louis newspaper. So he was a huge St. Louis fan. He didn't run his town in the summer at all. And he introduced me as one of the wrestlers in his upcoming main event for the first match of his fall 1973 series. I think that's what he called it. And I got very little reaction from most of the promoters around the world. They weren't familiar with somebody, who had only been in wrestling for 3 years in the sport. And there was a lot of places. There were wrestlers from all over the world, promoters from all over the world there. And, My name wasn't a big name at this point. So Sam kind of set me up for this to get the reaction he knew he was going to get, what was coming next. So he explained that I had fast become a star in St. Louis and that I was going to be facing a wrestler most everyone in the room knew very well. And I had no idea who it was. I didn't know what his opening card was. I had no idea who it was or what he was going to say. And then he asked Gene Kiniski to stand up.
Good God. Hey, Ron, surprise.
And when Gene stood up, the room popped. Everybody started laughing, man. And there was an instant conversation, a buzz around the room, like that kid's going to go up against Kiniski, right?
God.
So, Sam let him. Sam was a good worker, and he had good timing, so he let them all get a good laugh. And then when they kind of quieted down, he asked, he says, is there anybody here that has any idea what kind of night this kid's going to be in for in 2 weeks? Well, there's another pop at my expense. So
I don't know. That sounds like a bad way to find out bad news. So what was the match like?
Well, Dave, I'll tell you, I'll never forget it. That's one thing for sure.
Yeah.
I guess that's a good way to start it. I'll never forget August the 24th, 1973. I was wrestling Gene Kiniski for the Missouri Heavyweight Championship, and actually, it was pretty brutal in a way, but I kind of enjoyed it. Yeah, well, I was kind of goofy in a way, and I always liked working with Johnny Valentine and guys like that, and working with Gene Kiniski was kind of like working with Valentine, and I was like, he's pretty stiff, but so was I. So he didn't mind it, and I guess I didn't either too much. So actually, he called some great spots, man, that allowed me to show that I was a pretty good athlete, and I had very seldom ever done a flying head scissor in my career. And heels, called the match, and I'd never been a heel at this point in my career either. So, I wouldn't have called a flying head scissor in the match if it had been me calling the match. But Kiniski called for me to shoot him in the corner, and I turnbuckled him in the corner, man, and then, he said, flying head scissor me out of the corner and hold on to the scissors, man. So that move was rarely done anyway, but it was hardly ever done to a guy that was 6'4".
Oh, I can't imagine throwing the other side of your body up that high. I mean, literally your feet off the ground. So, I mean, I don't know if I ever saw anybody do that particular hold, but explain it for us, Ron.
Okay, so, there he was standing in the corner, and so I ran at him. I got a good running start, and you're exactly right. What you got to do is you got to get your legs up. You got to get your legs up the height of his head.
Yeah.
And he wasn't bent forward. He wasn't helping out. He was standing up there straight and tall as he could, making it as hard as he could for me to get him. And I ran. I jumped as high as possible with my legs stretched out, and they were aimed right at his head. Man, I was like, wow, I'm liable to take his head off here. But he called the spot, so we go find out. Yeah. So I wrapped my legs around his head, right, and I extended. Once you got your legs wrapped around it, would really make the move look good, you had to extend your body up higher than his head. So once your legs got hooked into his head, you got something to hold on to. Then I was able to push my body up even higher than his head. And then you just drop straight to the mat, and it sent us both flying out toward the center of the ring. And there I was, my legs wrapped around his head.
Wow. So I bet the crowd had to explode on that.
Oh, yeah, all 10,000 of them. There were 10,000 people in Kuhl Auditorium that night. And all 10,000 of them popped. They'd probably seen very few flying head scissors on a guy 6'4". So I held him in the hole for quite a while. He fought it a little bit, and then he called another spot. And this one was even more difficult than the first one he called. So when he finally got out of the hold, he bounced up to his feet and he headed for the ropes at full speed. And I jumped up, man. I gotta get there, get right to where he's going to be. So I jumped up on my feet and I headed for the ropes at full speed too. But I had to go in an alternate direction. He went one way and I went another. And once he bounced off the ropes, we crisscrossed in the middle of the ring. He had called this spot, and then I stopped at mid ring, and as he passed by me, then when he came back, I leapfrogged over him. He's 6'4", so and he's running pretty much straight up, and I didn't have any trouble just clearing him pretty decently. And when he came off the ropes, at full speed, I flying head scissors him again, man, while he's running. And
wow.
Boy, this time the crowd exploded, man. They were like, wow, look at that, you know. And actually, and thinking back, it's one of my favorite memories in the ring. And of all my matches, it's one of my favorites, favorite memories. Wow. And I gained a lot of respect for Gene Kiniski that night. And, you know, what he did is he called two spots in that match that could have easily ruined the whole match. But instead, it made the match memorable, not just for me, but for fans out there, too, that got to see those two flying head scissors. He basically had taken a very tall opponent, and he leveraged my height in a way that enhanced the match. It made both of us look better, you know, and he complimented me in the dressing room after the match, and that compliment gave me more confidence in what my future was going to be. And he, you know, by doing that, he did something every world champion of any kind owed to his opponents. So Gene Kiniski died of cancer on April 14th, 2010. He lost the NWA World Championship on February 11th, 1969 to Dory Funk Jr. in, of all places, Tampa, Florida. And, you know, there's a, you know, I mentioned back there the Sam Munstick's ability and the power he had to choose world champion. Things had changed by the time Dory Funk Jr. comes along. Florida territory has a lot more pull than St. Louis and Sam Munstick at this point. Dory Funk Jr. is going to win that title in Tampa. And in a future stud story, we're going to be taking a close look at the first of only two brothers, the Funks, to become NWA world champions. So I hope all the listeners out there have enjoyed this stud story for the first time in these NWA champion stories. I'll be wrestling. The next one that I wrestle is going to be Dory Funk Jr., and I'm going to wrestle him when he was world champion several times. And we're gonna talk about several different matches in the next one.